So we're going to shift here to our story behind the story segment. In this segment of the BookFunnel podcast, we like to hear about our guests' origin story, how they got into indie publishing, and of course, in this case, like the origin of Studio Moonfall. We talked a little bit about it, I suppose, but like take us back in time to the beginning. What got you involved in indie publishing, or just what's your villain origin story? I always like to call it a villain origin story because I don't want to assume.
I make monsters for a living. I accept that. So yeah, I've always made stories mostly starting with illustrations, drawing up the characters and all that, and ended up going to school for graphic design so that I wanted to color my artwork all bright and shiny like how cartoons are colored, rather than like, I've never learned to paint. I've painted things, but never leaned into it or anything. I went full digital when I started doing color work. And then it was going to school for graphic design that I pretty much learned all the tools of the trade for publishing with all the Adobe products with Photoshop and InDesign and all that. So then I ended up getting a terrible job sorting pictures of tractors for 80 hours a week. It was technically graphic design, but I ended up wasting most of my time just doodling characters while I was supposed to be working there. But then when I inevitably got canned from that job, I was able to collect unemployment, so I wrote that out and I wrote my first two books, and I ended up just giving stories to the characters that I had already been drawing. I was doing little 4 or 5 page coloring books with the characters, like Dora the Explorer with monsters. And then I had to answer the lifelong question of why a little hippie girl would be hanging out in a mad science laboratory. So I had to write my books and then, yeah, published my first two books. I didn't know what I was doing as far as publishing, distribution, and everything. So since I had already been doing that MySpace background in t-shirt hustle, I was familiar with Cafe Press back in the day. So I first
Mhm.
published my books on Cafe Press because they had printing on there. My 60-page book, the first one, it cost like $9 to print on Cafe Press. And then I dug into it, and then I found Lightning Source through Ingram and started actually publishing the books. Yeah, then I just did that, jumped into doing comic conventions and everything like that to figure out how to sell them. Once I kind of got the hang of how to sell them in person, then I actually started trying to learn the self-publishing stuff. And that was around the time of, I think, Joanna Penn. She had already been active in the scene, and it was around the time that self-publishing podcast had started up. I ended up linking up with those guys and doing character illustrations and book design for them. And then just kept making my own books. And I slowed down on writing and just started trying to learn how to sell books more. And yeah, doing comic conventions endlessly, do farmers markets every week. I'm doing events for the most part. And then, yeah, then I had this store open up beneath my apartment. And I was like, hey, landlord, let me get that thing. And
Right.
signed the lease. So, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So like just kind of a natural progression from one thing to the next to the next. So you've got 175 books out, you said already that you
Yes.
published?
Yes. Yeah.
And
175.
right. And most of those there's a wide range from what you've described. So we've got some coloring books in there, we've got some chapter books. What are the things that you're working on right now? Because I know you said you've got this whole plan to get to 250,
Oh, yeah.
right?
Yeah.
What are those books gonna be like?
Those ones are going to be journals.
Okay.
Yeah. The coloring books are the regular thing. I've been fair, like, I try to do a coloring book every month,
Mm-hmm.
but the current client work has jammed up the gears on that. So
Yeah.
hopefully by May, I should be back to monthly coloring books right now. So rewinding, my first books, they came out in 2009. And then in 2011, I figured the best way for me to promote these books would be to teach myself programming and launch a video game on the App Store with zombie beans that you shoot brains at. I want to go the G.I. Joe route with the cartoons to sell toys is kind of how
Yeah.
I want to promote my books. So I ended up launching Zombies. It was like Angry Birds kind of game. And
Okay, yeah.
the code for the game ended up like I hit my ceiling for programming, and so the code got outdated, so the game doesn't exist anymore. But since I illustrate, I just started I ended up adding the zombies to the third book of the Fear and Sunshine series, and now they live on in coloring books. So with the monthly schedule for coloring books, or that I strive for, ended up starting on Patreon, and subscribers on my Patreon, I draw them as zombie beans, and currently I'm putting all of their zombies on journals, so they're all going to have their own bean on a journal.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the current project. So we have 86 beans that I'm putting on journals, and Amazon's KDP, you can only publish 3 books a day now.
Right.
Yeah, I had a
Right.
couple of days where I had a couple instances where I was doing like 48 to 50 books in a day with the journals. So I can't do that
Sure.
anymore though, but I get it. So
Right.
I'm okay. I just spread
So
it out.
so the journals, are those, I mean, is it just like a completely blank journal, or do you have some interior content in there, or?
Yeah, pretty much just blank. There's
Yeah.
some front matter, back matter promotional stuff, because almost all the books lead into some sort of merchandising channel too. So we've got things like that. But yeah, the journals themselves, it's just the cover artwork, and
Right.
helps pad the numbers, so I'll be able to say that I have 250 plus books. So it's just,
Sure.
I mean, like
But hey,
50 of them actually have content. Yeah, that's
yeah.
still not too shabby.
Right. But still, I mean, that's 250 products that you
Yeah,
have to offer. And if that's your strategy to kind of go wide, if you will, and have a lot
yeah,
of, just like you were talking about stickers earlier, you just have to have a lot of stickers. I think it's
yeah,
maybe something kind of like that. And we were talking about the coloring pages too. You know, now you think about it, as a sci-fi author, I think my readers would be more likely to buy a journal with my cover art on it than a coloring book, in
yeah,
my opinion.
yeah,
So there's another idea out there for somebody who doesn't necessarily want to go the coloring book route. You've got
yeah.
other options.
Depending on your world building and everything, you can lean into fictional brands and stuff too. Like if you have like some megacorp
Oh
or something,
yeah.
put out a journal for them.
Yes.
Those are cool to do. That's kind of what the Zombies are. They are more or less an internal brand in my Fear and Sunshine books. So
Okay.
yeah.
That's interesting. And then turning it into a mobile app, a mobile game. Tell me about that, because that's got to be wild. Obviously,
Yeah.
it's not available anymore currently, but
No, if
that's
you I've got video of it on my YouTube channel. You'd
okay.
have to go back like 10 years on there, and
Sure.
it's got a like playthrough video. That was fun. It was I ended up teaching myself how to do all the sprite animation and everything like that.
Yeah.
And these journals that I'm doing right now, they actually use the background of the video game level as the background of the journal. And then it's like a
Okay.
Polaroid of the individual bean on the cover.
Cool.
So I'm still using assets from that game
Right.
13 years later, 14 years later. My Zombies coloring books, I took the characters and backgrounds and used those as pages in that coloring book as kind of filler.
Hmm.
So we have all of the Night of the Living Zombies Volume 2 includes all of the graphics from the video
Right.
game, just with the color all stripped out.
Right. Right.
Yeah. Yeah, having all the artwork with all these different products, like a single coloring book, I can generally pull 300 plus products out of what I produce for the coloring book itself, with
Hmm.
t-shirt designs or tote bags or hoodies or
Sure.
stickers or buttons or whatever. So
Right.
yeah, they're real good merchandising tools to do whatever you
Exactly.
want with.
Exactly. You also mentioned earlier about you're writing some content for Dungeons and Dragons. Is that right?
Yeah, I started a Goblin of the Month series.
Right.
It's not quite of the month yet, but we'll get there.
Sure. Sure. But I know one thing a lot of authors, a number of authors, I don't know necessarily that it's a lot, have started to do are these either a role-playing game to go along with their series, especially if it's in fantasy, or
Yeah,
even like just something that you could, if they're not maybe necessarily creating the game from scratch, but like, you know, scenarios that you could play out in Dungeons and Dragons. I'm not a Dungeons and Dragons player myself,
yeah,
so I don't know all the lingo. I'm into, as you can see behind me, Magic the Gathering, Warhammer 40K. I've got to mention it once each podcast, so there it is for this episode. But still, like, this is something that authors, it's another way to merchandise your stuff and to expand your IP. So how easy is it to do something like that? I imagine if you're like really familiar with Dungeons and Dragons, probably not too hard, but something you got to sit down and spend some time on. Yeah, what's been your experience with that?
Yeah, I've played for a while, so it wasn't too much of a stretch. And I've done the video game design. I've done some like initial work on board games that just never came to fruition. So I've
Uh-huh.
got a bit of a background in it. I think the Goblin of the Month thing, I started doing GaryCon, the Dungeons and Dragons convention over in Lake
Yep,
Geneva. This
right.
will be my
The
third
birthplace,
year. The
the
birthplace.
birthplace of Dungeons. Yeah, right.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. This will be my third year there, and it's cool. I was there to just sell my books and everything and promote the store since it's not too far away. But then I started doing the Goblin game last year, which the Goblin game, those characters were originally from a coloring book that I did. So I'm taking artwork from a coloring book, the characters from there, coloring them, and then I'm making an adventure built around that character. So the most recent one is Grib Knob Gnome Smasher. So he's a little goblin that smashes gnomes. He's teamed up with his head chef to make gnome pancakes, and you've got to go rescue the gnomes. So
Right.
they're just little, ideally like one-shot scenarios that people can jump into or tack into their existing
Yeah,
games.
right.
But I do map design for them and lots of stickers of the goblin itself too. So it's a cool little package that you get with that.
Sure, sure. And it's got to be one of those things I imagine where like you've got to like love the game. You're that type of game even. Like if it's a board game, I would imagine if you're an author and you're wanting to take your creative work and then repackage it as a board game, you probably should be like an avid board game player yourself. Like,
Yeah.
that's got to be something you're really into. Or like if you want to make a card game, we're talking with Kevin J. Anderson about this because in one of his recent Kickstarters, he had someone develop a card game
Yeah.
for his Dan Shamble series.
Okay. Yeah, I remember
But
that.
he wasn't much of a like he went into it, he's like, "Oh, well, I've got all the book covers and that's enough to make artwork for X number of cards," and then realized, well, no, it wasn't, and so he had to commission additional artwork, and there's so much involved with it. Honestly, it's a topic that I'd love to do like a webinar on one of these days because I have lots of thoughts about it, and I know a fair bit about some of these things too. So, but there's a lot more work involved in that stuff than I think. I think people underestimate the creative endeavor that it is to just make a game
Yeah.
compared to a book.
Yeah, I think the game design part of it for mine has been pretty simple. I'm not trying to reinvent the wheel or anything like that.
Sure,
It's more of a branching off into a different product type from existing
exactly.
things that I've already created.
Right,
It's also the stories, I suppose, for these games are really one-off things, so they're not like
right.
incorporated into my bigger picture worlds or anything. Though I will be able to build off bigger worlds based on these initial adventures.
Exactly.
So they're kind of going to
Yeah.
seed future projects
Yeah.
if I deem it so.
Right. You can kind of do it piecemeal and it can
Yeah.
kind of build and snowball if it starts to snowball. Yeah, that makes a lot
Yeah.
of sense. It makes a
Yeah.
lot of
Or
sense.
people can just play the adventure and then take it however they want. Like
Yeah,
they might find all sorts of good uses for their hat of many gnomes.
exactly.
I think for working with bookstores, find out the events that they've already got on their schedule and get involved with those events. I think that it makes their life easier to be like, hey, I'm an author and I'm available for this thing that you announced. And then it's because if they're doing regular events and everything, then they should have the systems in
Sure.
place to bring you into the mix with it being nice and easy.
Yeah. Yeah. No, you'd be helping them out that way, I guess, is the way to look at it, right? See what you can do for them as opposed to what they can do for you. Thank you for watching. Check out these other videos from BookFunnel, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel.